Welcome to Under the Radar, where we would dig up a lot more answers if the questions weren't buried too. I'm Kirk Powell. You would be justified in believing that enough has already been said about the big public clash between Darwinian evolution and Christian creationism. That is especially true if, as I am going to do here, you ignore the wide spectrum involved here and simply stick to that false dichotomy. I at least lack time to do otherwise. However, given the size and the vehemence of this controversy, I believe it would be helpful to examine here some sources of the animosity that many conservative Christians feel toward evolution. True to the nature of this show, I'm going to bypass the typical issues like the age of the universe or the interpretation of Genesis. Instead, I'm going to focus on two things I believe have been underrepresented in the public discussion of this issue. Two things that contribute to the hot-headedness of the Christian opposition, though they have virtually nothing to do with the public argument. Let me remind you, for the purposes of this episode, we'll be using the convenient, publicly recognized but by no means accurate dichotomy of Christian creationism and Darwinian evolution. So, the first submerged source of animosity is that Christians are confronted by evolutionary claims in contexts where they have little reason to expect them. That is to say, they are frequently startled by them. Let me give you one example, something from my own life. There's an IMAX movie called The Great Places. I saw it on the big screen, but the last I checked, it's available on Netflix. And it really only claims to be a movie about locations of spectacular natural beauty. However, literally from the beginning, there are a lot of evolutionary claims. Considering the rest of the context, they are completely unnecessary. Imagine the stout conservative Christian coming to the IMAX theater to see a show about beautiful places, perhaps bringing his kids along, why not? And he's confronted with evolutionary cosmology, evolutionary biology, etc. That's what I mean when I say that they're startled by it. Never knowing when or where it might appear, they grow jumpy and defensive. And sometimes that jumpiness and suspicion is interpreted as anti-intellectual or anti-scientific. But put yourself in their shoes and think about all the places you've heard talk of evolution. If you were at all skeptical about this worldview, think of all the media, perhaps entire magazines or even TV channels, that you would find yourself systematically avoiding. Because you hate them? No. But because you never know when evolution is going to jump out at you. The second secret stressor is that Christians feel intuitively that they are being presented with an unfair fight. That is to say, they are being presented with science versus faith, and that is a contest that in the modern West is extremely one-sided. Confidence in science is already very high, despite the fact that we would readily acknowledge if asked that while science is a great way to know about things, it is by no means the only way. Still, that isn't the only unfair fight that I'm referring to. There is the additional factor that the contest isn't really one of science versus faith, but of faith versus faith. For the vast majority of people, both of these are faith systems, that is, belief systems for which the adherent has no immediate proof. There may be mediated proofs, like intuition or derivation or witness testimony, but not immediate proof. How many people, after all, really have access to all the primary data, biological, archaeological, astronomical, or otherwise, that definitively supports evolutionary claims? Not many, even in those fields of work. For the most part, the kind of belief that people have in Darwinian evolution is not meaningfully different from the kind of belief people have in Christian creationism. They are both cosmological systems for which there is not immediate empirical proof in the hands of any given adherent. To advertise the contest as one of science versus faith is therefore not merely unfair, but in fact untrue, at least for the vast majority of people. Who knows, perhaps there is someone out there who has first-hand access to and understanding of all the various proofs, but I find that doubtful. Anyway, perhaps this has helped you to see the opposition of creationists to evolution in a new way, perhaps a more human way, as a defensive reaction against unpredictable attack, and a rightful resentment of an unfair fight. Next time on Under the Radar, we take a look at how the West has understood the difference between ideology and experience. Thanks for watching.